If you guys are into shooting the copper bullets, man, I got a great deal for you. We have partnered with Barnes Bullets. They are world famous, known for that VOR TX rifle, the deadliest, most accurate hunting loads on the planet. I like this company, guys, because I have a personal connection to these guys. Down in central Utah, my dad's got this ranch, and on the way to the ranch, you drive past this Barnes Bullets factory, and it's a really cool building just kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So I know them well. These all-copper bullets provide destructive power, double diameter expansion, maximum weight retention, and devastating energy transfer, all with excellent accuracy. It's a great choice for Western big game hunters and shooters everywhere. So check them out at barnesbullets.com and let me know what you guys think. I appreciate it. You've heard my Silencer Central ads, I'm sure, and I don't know if you have reached out and contacted them yet. If you're interested in a silencer, though, man, this is the way to go. Silencer Central from the start to finish, because it's quite the process. If you've never gotten a suppressor for one of your rifles, you've got to go through and do the ATF paperwork and the background checks and all that kind of stuff. But the cool part is Silencer Central takes care of it all. It's a several-month process, and so what's cool about it is if you don't want to drop all that money right at the top end of this whole process, you can just get a hold of them, and you can do like a payment plan while they're taking care of all the paperwork on the back end. I have the Banish 30, and this thing is awesome. I've never used one of these before, so I'm like learning as I go along, but what I was getting at is from start to finish, Silencer Central has been some of the most amazing people I've ever worked with through the process. They treated me like I was family, and I really appreciated it. You guys should check them out, and you can call them at 866-891-4494 or check it out at silencercentral.com. It will be worth your time, I promise. There exists a threat, from anti-hunting groups to politicians trying to give our land away, and we won't stand for it. Those vast western landscapes provide the space for our wildlife to thrive and a place for hunters and anglers to fuel the fire that sparks their soul. In this show, we share our love of hunting, fishing, and conservation. Here, we provide the foundation to meet these threats through passion and the grit of the American outdoorsman. Welcome to the Western Huntsman Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Western Huntsman Podcast, and it's a combo episode with Ike Eastman, and we are going to, let me put it this way. I'm sitting in a trailer here at the Hunt Expo, and I'm sitting with a bunch of legends here. I'm way out of my league, but I'm pretty excited to record this episode. So across from me, I got Ike Eastman of Eastman's Hunting Journals. I've got the infamous Jim Heffelfinger, return guest for the Western Huntsman, by the way, and Ed Arnett, right? Did I say your name right?
You did.
And we just met, me and Ed, and I already really like him. So I'm in good company and really happy to have you guys here and record a podcast. Thanks, guys.
What's not to like? Ed's the president and CEO of the Wildlife Society. Not the president, the CEO of the Wildlife Society, which is the leading professional organization for wildlife biologists like me.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So the wildlife management profession really started with Aldo Leopold. I think everybody generally knows that. He was the first professor of wildlife management at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he and colleagues started kicking around the idea of, first of all, they wanted a journal to place the science they were just starting to gather. And largely it was field notes and anecdotal observations and structured, studies that were starting to come out. And they didn't have any place to put it necessarily. So they wanted to create a journal. So they created our flagship Journal of Wildlife Management. In 1936, we started at the North American Wildlife and Natural Resources Conference. This is a conference that brings together, Jim knows this all too well, brings together agency heads, at fed and state level, lots of the nonprofit world. And the idea at the time was to bring this emerging profession of wildlife, the scientists and field people, together with agency leads and such. So we formed in 1936 as the Society of Wildlife Professionals at the first North American meeting. And then the very next year in St. Louis at the second, we changed our name to the Wildlife Society. And Leopold was part of all that. He had a little opposition at first because Leopold was we were all part of the Ecological Society back then. And I believe it was a working group or a subcommittee on game management. And there was a little bit of opposition to forming our own society, but came around, and Leopold was our third president of the Wildlife Society. So we've been around a long while. And we have chapters across all states, multiple provinces. We got an emerging chapter in Mexico. We're broken into sections. We've got a section in Canada and then regional sections, think Southeast, Southwest, that kind of thing. And members are voted into our council, and our council basically are my bosses. And then we have a president that serves 4 years, serving vice president, president-elect, president, and then immediate past president. So that's a little bit of our governance structure. About 11,000 members right now.
So Wyoming has Wyoming Wildlife Society. So they're a subchapter.
They're a state chapter.
Of you guys. The way I understand it, it's more of a co-op than it is. It's not like you're governing them like some nonprofits.
I wonder if you're talking about the Wyoming Wildlife Federation.
Yes.
Okay, that's different.
That is different.
Joy.
And your description is correct.
That's Wyoming Wildlife Federation.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So
Interesting
you're right.
side
That's
note.
kind of a confederation of kind of independent groups.
Yeah.
But this is different. These are state chapters.
But an interesting note.
A little more integrated nationally, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Right.
I was on the Idaho Wildlife Federation board, and totally independent of like the Montana Wildlife Federation.
Yeah.
So.
But they're a little similar in that there's a National Wildlife Federation, headquarters, international, whatever you want to call it. And these are independent entities that fall under the umbrella of the Wildlife Federation. Same thing with TWS. So our state chapters, it's a big umbrella, but they are independent entities. Interesting story. The Wildlife Federation was formed at exactly the same meeting at the same time as the Wildlife Society. It's just it was decided that they would take on more policy and public education from the Wildlife Federation perspective. Think public outreach and Ranger Rick, right? And Wildlife Society was more the science and management arm of this emerging profession.
That's interesting. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, so, and you're also a professor.
I have an adjunct appointment, as does my colleague Jim at Colorado State University.
Good for you.
Yeah. Mine's at University of Arizona in Tucson.
Keeps my feet in the academic world and try to keep them a little honest.
Melding the young minds.
Yeah.
There's a lot of value in having people like Ed and I have been out in the field for a long time, have run public meetings, have wrote management plans, have done surveys, to be interacting with students at that level as they're learning, as they're sponges, they're learning what they need to know to be wildlife biologists.
Yeah.
And if they don't have access to people like us that have all that experience, they could conceivably just graduate without some really interesting hands-on and important hands-on information.
And they will be the wildlife leaders of the future. And so it's very important that we have a mix of, obviously, of students, early career professionals, but also the professionals that have been around a while and know the history and know how the system works. Yeah.
Well, and I can't think of anybody better to be influencing those younger minds than you guys, because we look to the future and there's a lot of concerns. But before we go down some of that path, Jim, for the maybe a few people that live on Mars that don't know who you are, maybe we should do a quick overview. Mr. Servant-Nut
Your
himself.
exaggerations are profound. Yeah.
That's what I'm known for, Jim.
Right. So just a little background. I've been with Arizona Game and Fish for 32 years now, 23 years as a regional biologist, organizing helicopter surveys, doing hunt recommendations, more of the game management kind of side of it. And then the last 8 years, I moved to a wildlife science coordinator position. So it's kind of a science advisor for the agency to make sure that the decisions we make and the policies we create have a good, solid scientific foundation. Like take a deep dive into the science and make sure that we understand the latest and best available science on things. So that's what I do for the agency now. I also, in one of my roles here at the Expo, is I chair mule deer working group for the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And that working group then is the mule deer or black-tailed deer expert for 24 Western states or Canadian provinces and territories, 24 members that get together and represent Western North American mule deer. And every year we have a meeting on Wednesday right before this expo starts on Thursday. We have an all-day meeting on Wednesday, and we have a big agenda, and we go through all kinds of things that are affecting mule deer and black-tailed deer populations and kind of come up with solutions and things that we can do to improve management or just improve communication about what's going on out there.
Communication. So that's a big one. And I want to touch on that at some point in this podcast, is about communicating and disseminating the information that you guys, not only the decisions, but how you guys came up with the decisions, and giving that to the public in the best form and the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, I'm an idiot. I'm the dumbest person at this table, guaranteed.
No, I promise
and you guys
no.
talk over my head most of the time. And so
you're
if
both a little
it's happened to
humble,
me,
I think.
it's happening to audiences too, where,
Right.
you know, you guys write and you're communicating at a level that needs distilled down. So
Yeah.
that the consumer understands what we did with mule deer and why.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you bring up mule deer, but
Yeah,
Well, and
'cause
interestingly, you know, with what you're saying, Ike, and also, by the way, you're not the dumbest guy in the room, I promise. We're like representing the entirety of the West right here in this little room. We've got Jim. He's Arizona. We've got Colorado to my right. You're in Wyoming. I'm up in North Idaho, Northwest Montana area. You know, and it's all mule deer country in very different ways and very different landscapes. And I grew up here in Utah, and I know the mule deer here very well. And so it's just I just want to like kind of point that out. It's there's such a vast
Did we
difference
just-
in the Western landscape, but it's all mule deer country.
did we just become part of the mule deer consortium? I don't know.
it sounds like it.
Must have.
Sounds like it.
They invited me once to that thing. I completely botched the whole deal electronically and never got invited back.
Really?
Told a horrible joke because I got nervous. It was fun. It
Yeah, yeah.
was a good joke.
Yeah.
Just
It was good.
I thought it
A
was.
good
I was
joke.
in the room there.
The execution was bad. Is that what it was? It was a good joke.
I'm just glad
Yeah.
you don't remember it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Well, when you're
You want me to tell you it again?
yeah, no, that's all right. No, when you talk about communication, you're right, because we want the public to advocate for wildlife and for habitat, but they've got to be informed. I mean, that advocacy has to be an informed advocacy, and that's our role, and that's our job as wildlife agencies and biologists, to make sure people that are interested, which should be everybody, really has the knowledge, and we're just pumping out that information.
Do you feel like that there's and this question goes to you too, Ed, where like there's kind of this disconnect that the general public has, especially hunters? You know, I guess what I'm asking, sometimes I worry that people focus on the wrong things, and we get so uptight on, like, you know, I'll give you a great, like, Facebook over who's using a 6.5 Creedmoor over a 300 Win Mag or something. And we're missing the more important things that people need to be focused on and concentrating on. And do you think that some of that comes from a lack of communication from what the information the biologists are bringing to the table that's getting presented to commissions versus what the public knows, and how we're missing that connection for people to understand what actually is important when it comes to mule deer conservation? That was a complicated question, but
Yeah, no,
That was a really good one, though.
because there could be like landscape issues that are negatively affecting mule deer, whether it's some kind of development, or whether it's the drought, or whether it's overgrazing, or whether it's pinyon juniper encroachment, or lack of fire in our forests, and all that stuff is just big picture stuff. It's really important, and it needs to be worked on if we're going to improve mule deer herds. But people might be spending all of their energy talking about how some agency's draw system is stupid and the bonus points need to be changed to something, and so there's all this energy focused on something like that. And the reason for that is because that sort of thing affects them personally, directly, right there. Right. Whereas pinyon juniper encroachment doesn't really affect them so closely.
They're not seeing it every day.
Yeah,
That's
so
right.
so that's the challenge, is to highlight these big picture issues that people should be focusing on, and maybe hopefully steer them away from wasting so much energy on things that don't really matter.
Well, I was going to insert it's an issue of scale and source, and you brought up the landscapes. The bigger the scale, the more complex things get. And ecology and wildlife biology and conservation is inherently complex. but it can't be complicated. And that's the crux. And that's largely what they don't teach us in college. Jim and I participated in some workshops trying to train people how to take very complicated information and make it uncomplicated so it resonates with people. And I learned this in the policy space. If you start talking about CWD and how important that is for deer and go down the biology path or the epidemiology path, you're going to lose a senator or their staffer real quick. When you start putting economic numbers to what it means for mule deer hunting and what it means from an ecosystem perspective to lose a key species like that, just as it relates to the public and their perception of wildlife, all that stuff, you relate it to voters and economics. And that's not comfortable for a lot of scientists. It's just not, but it's what you have to do to really resonate with the public. And I think that I always say, and I said it just yesterday, I said, this has to resonate with soccer moms or soccer dads in Chicago, Philly. If they don't care about mule deer or sagebrush habitat, if we don't give them a reason to care, they're not going to.
Yeah. I was looking at in a graph, and I can't remember the number, so I'm going to make this up. But the point is, I was looking at a graph that there's, for instance, in Colorado, you guys are having a mountain lion trophy argument. Can we hunt them? Can we not hunt them? And it's like 20% of the people want to hunt them, 20% of the people don't want to hunt them. And there's this 60% in the middle that don't really know because they're, focused on soccer, focused on whatever. But they're the ones that are making that decision because they're going to the ballot box and they're voting yay or nay on ballot initiative, whatever. Those are the people that we need to communicate with. And those are the people that your audience, Jim, my audience needs to be talking to, the sister-in-law, the brother-in-law, the people that aren't, those people that are in that 60%.
Yeah.
And we need to be telling, taking that information that you guys do at the working groups, distilling it down and disseminating that so that our audience can be, I don't want to call weaponized, but you can have that in your back pocket.
Utilized to our benefit. And I think that's the challenge is, like, you guys both make good points from a sense that people are distracted with mortgages and minivans and soccer moms and, all these things in our lives that when you start talking about like from a biology standpoint, and I'm not even going to try because I'll make myself sound dumb, but how do we simplify it so the general public can grasp the concept without their eyes glazing over and they get distracted? We watch social media on these 10-second reels, and everybody has such short attention spans. And it's this, I don't care if it's about wildlife management, conservation, or if it's about wolf management in Colorado, or if it's about, PETA making a real emotional video and people trying to counter that discussion or talking point, because it's so much more challenging from our end to communicate why they're wrong or why wildlife management should be such a high priority. Yeah. So how do we make it, for lack of a better term, more sexy so the general public can grasp the importance of it, I guess.
Yeah. Science isn't sexy. That's the problem. Is emotions are very sexy and eye grabbing and they get your own emotions and then you counter with science and it is boring. Yeah. And so that's the challenge. The Mule Deer Working Group with mule deer issues, Mule Deer Working Group's been really successful in taking the science that is out there and boiling it down to being easily digested, easily understood by the public. We now have a series of 45 fact sheets. And those are, we said at the beginning, those are one sheet of paper, front and back, with a couple pictures, so it's not solid text, and no citations, no jargon, no scientific terms at all, just plain language. And so we have a fact sheet on winter feeding and whether that's appropriate and when it's appropriate of mule deer. The predator-prey relationships. We've got one on hybrids. We have one on elk and mule deer interaction. We have 45 of these things, and they're all without a citation and hopefully without a big word because they're just simple and easy to understand. So it can be done, but it's harder to write in simple terms, harder to write complex things in simple terms than it is to write with big words. Because as a scientist, as biologists, we can write really easy using all these big words and we all know what it means. And then nobody else besides the biologist can read it. It's harder. It's harder to be understood.
Yeah. And I think that's why we get cut off at the pass with this. The wolf thing in Colorado is a great example. And I'd love to get your take on this. You've got these folks that live in downtown Denver, making decisions on wolves being reintroduced into the landscape where they have no impact on the people that are voting for this life, their lives, right? There is no direct impact to their life when they never leave the city limits of Denver, right? They're not ranchers, they're not hunters, they're not, heck, most of them don't even go out into the, they think their idea of nature is going to the city park and seeing a robin or a squirrel or something, you know? And so what is your take on that, Ed? What happened? I mean, I would be remiss with my audience and probably yours too, like, if I don't ask you about the wolf issue in Colorado.
Before we go there, though, I did not know, Jim, there was 45 of those sheets. 45, yeah. Are they online?
They are all online. I think we're waiting for a few to be laid out. There's probably 40 online as PDFs. Yep. And that's the website. It's a pass-through website. It goes to the WAFWA, the Western Association website, but it's Mule Deer Working Group, all one word, muledeerworkinggroup.com. And if you go there, you'll see a link for fact sheets, and there'll be about 40, and we're waiting to get the other 5 or so laid out and put up there.
That is amazing information. If
we should put that in the show notes of the for
100%
sure.
Need to be a link.
No, it's a good source of information. They're very well done. And I was going to say a little bit of what happened in Colorado or any of these controversial situations comes down to who owns the narrative.
That's right.
And who owns the narrative?
Yeah,
from the communication perspective. And I'm not ashamed to tell people how I voted. I voted no, but it may not be for reasons you might think. I voted no, not because I don't necessarily want wolves in the state of Colorado. I don't like the way it came about. I don't like ballot box biology, and I don't like state legislatures messing around with our professional wildlife biologists. And I think the public has to have input, and we have multiple ways for public to have input. And if the agencies and such aren't listening, then okay, that's a different issue. But we need our professionals managing wildlife populations. And the other thing I really quickly want to say, back to the getting the narrative out, a lot of this comes down to individuals versus populations. I think we'll get into that a little bit. That gets complicated to explain, but when you really break things down, it's about saving individuals versus populations. Most populations of animals that people care about are in reasonably good shape, and they most assuredly are being managed under the rule of law and under professional management of state agencies in cooperation with others. And that's a message that's challenging to get out there, but it's critical.
The way Shane Mahoney put it one time when I heard him speak is that there's this rising general empathy among society. They're more empathetic. They're more worried about individuals. They're more worried about saving some individual that's wounded. And that rising empathy in general society is on a collision course for us who are managing ecosystems and populations. And populations are healthy at the expense of the individuals. Individuals have to die all the time for populations to not be overpopulated and hurt the ecosystem. So populations thrive because animals die. And yet right at odds with that is this rising empathy of people not wanting individuals to die. This is like on a collision course that we have to deal with in conservation and in society.
That's right. When you say individuals, are you talking about an individual of a species, or are you talking about an individual species?
Individual of a species.
Okay.
If you look at the Wildlife Society, we have position statements and issue statements on all kinds of things. And one of them has to do with animal rights philosophies, another on sustainable use and human use of wildlife. But we've emphasized populations, maintaining healthy populations. We remove the discussion away from individuals. Because when you're focusing on individuals, now you're down into the animal rights philosophy of saving every individual. And it's just not possible. I mean, we're organic organisms. We're all going to die. There's just no way to get around it.
Conservation profession has been populations is a focus.
Right.
But we've got the public more and more worried about individuals.
The individuals. and that's the shift of the narrative.
I couldn't agree with how you put that more, because that and talking about that narrative topic and the way that the narrative has been portrayed as if hunters are kind of put into this pot of we're all smoke a pack a day and shoot, shovel, and shut up and all that kind of stuff. That narrative that we created, that negative connotation that hunters have now.
Some people have,
and everybody confuses that. Like if I lived in Colorado, I would have voted no as well. However, it's not because I'm a shoot, shovel, shut up guy. It's because, well, there's a lot of reasons, but the point is because I am for management of wolves and management of any predator species, whether it's grizzly bear, wolves, mountain lion, and management through hunting, because that's where I've seen it work. I've seen it in the state of Idaho. The most prolific wolf population in the lower 48 has one of the most aggressive wolf management programs out there, and yet we are still having problems with wolves. And so these folks that think that because we want wolf management means that we want every single wolf to die, and when they show these emotional videos of this wolf getting blown away by some so-called quote-unquote hillbilly out there, just wanting to kill everything, that's the narrative they run with, and that's where the general public accepts as a narrative, and that's what's so hard for us to counter.
It's pretty hard to counter.
Yeah.
So and you got to have the right messengers and all of that. And I think, back to just the quick question on what do I think, you mentioned it, and I'll just add on, folks that voted yes largely will never see one. They'll never pay much for it. There's no wolf tax right now. You can buy. There's no consequence. There's no consequence, and they're not going to pay for it either. And I think that's a large argument that's circling right now about who pays for conservation. And the sporting community pays a significantly large chunk in some states, but don't pay all of it. But that's another part of the issue is who's paying. And, I think as the voting public starts appreciating the fact that there's never going to be enough conservation dollars, but if they're not paying in, then I think it's a critical piece of the messaging that has to be woven into how we're going to manage these critters. And they're managed scientifically. The state of Colorado has a good wolf plan. And they're going to pay damage. At least that's the idea. But they have to be managed because they will populate, they will reproduce, they'll have.
Yeah.
I've been talking about Hoffman boots for a very long time. You guys know that I'm a huge fan of this company. And it's not just the great products that they make, it's the story behind the company and the people that run it. This generational family of shoemakers right here in North Idaho makes some of the best hunting boots and pack boots and lineman boots and all your boot needs right in one place at hoffmanboots.com. For us hunters, I highly recommend the Explorer. And I don't care if you're running in the 6-inch or the 8-inch or the 10-inch. Personally, I love my 8-inch Explorers. They've got the Vibram sole. They are totally waterproof. There's no break-in period. Guys, you can't go wrong with Hoffman boots because you get all that without breaking the bank. So check them out at hoffmanboots.com and use promo code all caps lock Huntsman10 at checkout for 10% off, and find out why I have been wearing my Hoffman boots for years and years. Don't be one of those people that have it in their mind that Savage Arms is the same firearms that your grandpa was running around with 40 years ago. It's not. Big game hunting rifles that you can count on. I love my Savage firearms. I have got the Savage 110 Hunter, and my daughter is pretty happy with this 110 Apex Hunter XP. The AccuTrigger is a really interesting little piece to this firearm, and it's a new piece of technology that if you've never tried one, you should, because it'll make you more accurate. It's a much easier, higher quality firearm than anything else I've got out there, and I've got a lot of firearms, guys, and so if you're in the market for a new hunting rifle, make sure you visit savagearms.com, because I promise you're going to find something that is accurate, easy to handle, easy to use, long range, functional, just a high quality weapon that you could take to the field and have a lot of confidence that when the time comes, you've got that Savage backing you up and you're going to be notching a tag. Check it out, savagearms.com. Let them know the Western Huntsman sent you. Thanks, guys.
I would have voted no because I spent the last dozen years of my career working really hard through the Arizona Game and Fish Department to restore Mexican wolves in Mexico and the Southwest and Arizona and New Mexico. We're trying really hard to get those animals up and recovered and get them off the endangered species list and have them managed by the state agency, just like foxes and bobcats and mountain lions are, which is the way it should be. But that is jeopardized by bringing big, large wolves that came. They have Canadian genomes, Canadian genes were brought into Yellowstone, brought into that which then filtered into Washington and Oregon. It was those wolves with Canadian genes that are now brought and released right at the doorstep of our Mexican wolf recovery area. And so there's a lot of concerns, and there has been for the last 3 years or so of all the agencies working really hard together to figure out how are we going to keep those two types of wolves apart, because even a single large wolf from Colorado coming down into Arizona, New Mexico, which is an easy walkabout for wolves.
Yeah. Well,
but even
within
one
their
wolf
distribution.
is going to dominate a breeding position right away. Those pups are going to be larger. Those pups are going to disperse, dominate breeding positions. And you have what geneticists call a genomic sweep, where you have these Canadian genes sweep like a wildfire through the population of Mexican wolves. And now you don't have Mexican wolves anymore. You've got some hybrid wolves that are not adapted to that arid Southwest. Mexican wolves are about 65% of the size of the northern wolves. They're smaller. And they evolved in that desert kind of arid, not in the desert, but in the highlands of a very arid Southwest. So now having these Canadian genes sweep through Mexican wolves could spell disaster for Mexican wolf recovery that we're working so hard on. So ironically, a whole bunch of people that love wolves in Colorado may have just voted for the destruction of the Mexican wolf recovery.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. There's always been a rumor that I've heard that Colorado was like a buffer zone between the gray wolf and the Mexican wolf, and they didn't really actually have wolves. Those wolves would travel in and out, but they didn't have home packs. Is that true?
No, there's a lot of wolves in Colorado. There's one
They've been
person
coming and going for a while.
Yeah, one person wrote a book
From Wyoming
documenting
or from
Wyoming
Arizona?
Well, just all of those Rocky Mountains, all the way
Yeah.
down through Colorado, was all just all these big northern wolves, and they were a little bit smaller in the mid part of the states like Utah, Colorado. It was a natural body size climb from big wolves in Canada to very small wolves in Mexico. Now we wiped out all the wolves in the United States in between those two ends, and so now we're recovering these small wolves down in Mexico, and we retained the big Canadian wolves. They never disappeared, and now through stepping through the Pacific Northwest, but the Northern Rockies, we've got now those big Canadian wolves from the northern end now at the doorstep of the Mexican wolves at the southern end. So it's not a natural intergradation of body size like it was historically. But Colorado was full of wolves, and then they were extirpated. But still, the Mexican wolves were in Mexico, in the Sierra Madre, in the what we call the Sky Island Mountains in southern Arizona and southern New Mexico. And then there was a gap. There was a division there with the smaller Mexican wolves interchanged only a little bit with those larger northern wolves. If they interchange freely, they wouldn't be different. They wouldn't be genetically different, physically different. They had to be isolated. Yeah. That's how they're different.
Yeah.
So obviously that middle range, those wolves that were in Wyoming, northern Colorado, we extirpated them, and there's no way to get that back without crossing the Canadian with the Mexican, which is kind of what happened. It's happening, but it's happening
over a long time.
Yeah, we're talking century.
Yeah. Well, now that we've wiped out those wolves in the middle, there will eventually be interchange between Mexican wolves because they're in Colorado now.
Right.
But what we want to do is not let that happen until we get Mexican wolves recovered. Because they're listed separately on the endangered species list. They're a separately listed entity. Yeah. And so we want to recover those first, delist them. Eventually, they'll probably mix. But the immediate concern is to protect the Mexican wolf until it's recovered.
Now's not the time.
Yeah, it's too early to start mixing that up.
So when we're talking about all these complicated things like, wolf management, Mexican wolves versus Canadian gray wolves, and what is a timber wolf? Why I keep hearing a timber wolf.
Right. Yeah, good question. It's just that in the Midwest, those wolves in the Midwest just kind of gained that nickname or that moniker, the timber wolf. And then you have a basketball team, right? The Timberwolves.
Yeah.
And so that's just kind of a regional name. It's not really a true taxonomic category. You won't see that in any kind of
it's a common name.
Scientific.
It's a problem with common names.
So it's not because I had somebody tell me, well, they reintroduced the wrong wolves into Idaho and Montana. Yep. They used to be the Timberwolf and
that's not true. Timberwolf is kind of a Midwestern thing, but also that whole story about they introduced the wrong wolf into Yellowstone. They introduced this giant Canadian wolf. There really isn't any scientific support for that. Those wolves that were in Yellowstone are not that much different from those in southern Alberta and things.
See, and
that was blown out of proportion.
And I've said that on my podcast. You don't know how many nasty emails I got about how wrong I was about saying that.
Yeah.
But and that's what I think I mean a lot of the times when, as hunters and as a community, we focus on the wrong thing.
Right.
Who cares what breed it is?
Yeah.
What we need to care about is how we as a community market ourselves as conservationists, whilst at the same time wanting to promote trapping and hunting, because we know what the kind of conservation that comes out of that. Conservation through hunting and trapping, and predator management and those kind of things. So. On that, were you going to ask something there, Ike? Did I cut you off there?
Keep going. It'll be at the end of this.
Okay.
I know where you're headed.
Okay. Well, I was going to kind of shift gears there. So if you got
one of the interesting you were talking about the narrative that we hunting, conservation through hunting and trapping. One of the problems that I see, and this actually happened with one of my guys last night. He was sitting at an establishment and it was closing down, and these two guys walk up to him. I don't know if you guys heard this story. Brandon, standing there. These two guys walk up and they ask what they're doing and all this stuff. And he gets in this conversation with these two guys that I think are just skiing, and they're from back east somewhere. They were just skiing. And one of the guys is really interested in the North American model of wildlife conservation and had no idea any of this happened. The other guy flat calls Brandon a liar, which
a liar.
Brandon stands up. Says, my 21-year-old self would be beating you bloody. I'm 47. I'm going to go to bed.
Yeah.
And leaves. If you ask him about it, he'll get all bent again. But the problem is, I told Brandon, I said, the problem is the narrative. It doesn't make a lot of logical sense. If you're trying to conserve something, why would you want to hunt it? And I said, you didn't bring up the key. Of course, he was seeing red. He couldn't. There's a difference between conservation and preservation. Those are different. Right. And a lot of people think we have to preserve it to conserve it, and that's not true.
Mm-hmm. No. Yeah, sustainable use of wildlife has been the foundation for the most successful system of wildlife conservation in the world. No other continents have other systems, and they're successful in places, but none of them are successful as much as the system of public lands that we have, the system where money comes in from the sustainable, scientifically guided, sustainable use of a few individuals out of the population of a few species. A very minority of species are hunted. And from that, we have law enforcement, we have research, we have habitat acquisition, improvement of habitat. We have all of this stuff that drives our conservation comes from the sustainable use of wildlife. So if someone wants to talk about we need to stop harvesting wildlife, it just, we need to sit them down and talk with them some more because it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of things that cascade from that. And I think, the North American model is an interesting topic because there's a lot of misconception around it and a lot of misuse and misinformation. And, it's a history lesson as much as anything. Valerius Geist, who came from Ukraine, pulled these ideas together about what was unique to North America. Now, I want to say this again, unique to Canada and in U.S. in particular, that you don't see this in other places. So, for example, conservation on private lands. Nope, that's germane worldwide. That's not unique to America. But the 7 tenets, as they're called, are principles. They're just that. They're principles of the foundation of what we put together in this country.
What are those 7?
Oh, God, you would do that.
Put him on the spot.
Wildlife is a public trust resource. Science is science is the underpinning.
What is that?
Democracy by hunting.
What is that group in Colorado that is dealing with this predator management issue right now? Colorado, I can't remember the name of it, and it's driving.
I know. They're doing good work, and I've heard them on podcasts, but I can't come up with the name.
Yeah, I can't remember the name. It's Colorado something. It was just on one of my recent episodes, so I put it in the show notes, but we homeschool our kids, and I just took them through their video series on the 7 principles of the North American model of wildlife conservation.
good.
And it's good because we were talking about how to simplify complicated things.
Yeah.
Those videos do a good job at simplifying what the model is
They
and
do.
how those principles break down and why.
Yep.
And I mean, the videos are like 30 seconds a piece.
Yeah,
And it's
awesome.
actually,
Yeah.
My eyes didn't glaze over, and I've got ADD like you wouldn't believe. So
that's on YouTube, isn't it?
yeah, the videos are on
I'm
YouTube.
going to GTS that. You know what
Mahoney does
GTS
a
is?
really good video through the Boone and Crockett Club. They had a show, Boone and Crockett Country. He does a really nice video. I use it in my policy class at Colorado State.
Yeah.
But I think we hang up a little too much on it sometimes. And
Yes, you're right.
the people that wrote about it, Valerius Geis, Shane Mahoney, John Organ, they're even saying, forget about changing the model and doing all these crazy. Let's get a wildlife conservation policy and an agenda, and and make it a big tent and get everybody involved. I mentioned earlier, who pays for it. Everybody needs to pay for conservation. I mean, Missouri got it right when they added a very tiny, itsy bitsy little tax. So everybody really does pay in that state, but that's not the case everywhere. And some states are 100% dependent on PR dollars and sportsman license dollars and such.
And the National the National Wildlife Society meeting, Ed helped organize a whole bunch of different symposium. And one we talked about the North American model, and Shane Mahoney gave a really good overview of where we're at. And the idea that the North American model isn't some strategic plan that someone wrote out and said, this is how we're going to implement conservation. It was a description by Valerius Geis of, like Ed says, what are the unique things that we do in North America. And so people sometimes hold up the North American model and they say, well, this isn't consistent with the North American model, or that isn't. It wasn't meant to be all encompassing.
That's right.
And so as we go in the future, Shane said, the North American model doesn't need to be discarded and replaced with something more modern. It needs to serve as our foundation to build upon that successful.
It's a black and white system that is allowed for some gray area, right?
Yep.
So some flexibility, because
and the world changes. Everything changes. So we need to adapt with it.
Look at where we're at in Salt Lake. This used to be mule deer winter grounds, and now it's developed from one end to the other. And I grew up here. It was not like this back in the 80s. And like, I fly in now, I don't even recognize this place. Yeah. So I'm using that as an example, as things ebb and flow and things change on the landscape, and so that gray area is good. Can I derail us for just a minute? We can come back to this because you guys keep talking about Dr. Geis there.
It's your show.
He told me, I'm curious what your opinion is on this. He told me, and I've been talking about this for a while. So in mule deer management, when you are talking about mule deer that live like in areas where I live, where there's whitetail as well, generally speaking, the mule deer are up high, the whitetail are down low, but the whitetail will come in and outbreed, if you will, with the mule deer. Okay. But he said that the way to prevent that is to shoot the small mule deer bucks, because the big mule deer bucks will kick the little whitetail's ass, right? Okay,
yeah,
and I'm rednecking this up.
I know the theory. I know what you're talking about.
21-year-old Brandon versus.
Yep. That's what you're dealing with. I'm in my 40s, but I still talk like I'm in my 20s, and I've accepted it, gents. But so essentially, I presented this on one of my podcasts. We were talking about mule deer hunting. And somebody was asking about, maybe we shouldn't shoot the mule deer in this particular area. It was a sensitive area in Idaho or whatever. The whitetail seemed to be taking over, which does seem to be happening. But anyways, is there anything to that theory, in your opinion?
I would say it's just a theory. And Valerius Geis was a good friend of mine. And so we talked about a lot of things. And he started writing in the late 60s, 70s. He wrote a couple books about human health. I mean, this guy was really brilliant.
Yes, he
and
was.
a whole bunch of his ungulates, like deer and bighorn sheep writings, when you read them now, I think how brilliant he was, how far ahead of himself he was. And I can't believe that he was so insightful. And then there's a lot of other things that I read that he's a friend of mine. just theories. It's just stuff that he's thrown
sure.
out. And this fits in that latter category.
Is that what it is?
But
Just
he
somebody,
right.
he's just always thinking.
A friend of mine called him a theory monger. He's always cranking theories and theories. But the neat
That's
thing
how you
about him,
advance science.
but he would have
right
like
there.
a theory about something, and then some graduate student would do a PhD and research that intensively, and they would come out at the end and find out he was wrong. And Val would say, "That was a wonderful theory. That was a wonderful study. That was a wonderful study. Those results are fantastic. They
he
proved
didn't
me
have
wrong."
ego with it, right?
No, he did
just
not.
was like, no,
He did not.
You,
He threw
you disproved it.
theories out like,
Yeah.
a theory a day. And then when someone disproved it, he thought that was wonderful that someone spent the time to look into it.
Okay, I'm just curious because
Yeah.
I don't want to shoot the little bucks. I want to go after the
Yeah.
big bucks. So that makes me feel better. I can pursue the big.
One of
bucks.
those things that you think about it, and you go, "Huh, that kind of makes sense," but it's just him thinking, thinking out loud.
So on that note, I was sitting next to Dallas Safari Club. I always get in these conversations at like 10:30 at night, right? I don't know why. I'm apparently asked the right questions after about 2 or 3 bourbons, but I was sitting next to these 2 biologists from Texas, and they are, and I can't remember their names. You probably know them.
Probably.
They were talking about deer CWD, and one of the things that he told me, which blew me away, and I have zero proof of this other than he told me, is that the majority of deer that actually impregnate a doe are younger bucks.
Yeah, no, not really true. But where that's coming from is, and it was Randy DeYoung did some work in South Texas on white-tailed deer, and he found that 30% of the fawns were sired by 1 and 2 year olds. So not a majority, but 30%
That's a huge.
surprising.
That's a lot more than you
So
think.
30%
And
is
that-
really surprising. Like, wow.
Well,
Remember, I emailed you about a year ago on that topic, asking regarding what some of these. If that was more selfish on my side. On my whitetail, I have property that I like to hunt whitetail on. We get some big ones on there, but I was only seeing like 1 or 2 big bucks, and I was worried that the does wouldn't get bred if we killed those 2 bucks.
Yep.
But
And
not the case.
He also, in that same study, because they took samples from the fawns and they looked genetically at who was the father, but they also found something like 25% of the pairs of fawns, twin fawns, about 25% had different fathers. So if you look at these pairs of fawns, about 25% had different fathers. So these does get bred by a couple bucks. A young buck will sneak in and breed, and a big buck will breed it.
That's what he said. Think about it. When you were in high school, you were way more potent than you are now.
and sneaky and quick and crafty.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so that kind of ties into the conversation you and I had at one point where we talked about how the term trophy hunting has been hijacked by the anti-hunting community
as poaching,
as poaching, or just saying, they throw out terms like trophy hunting as if the goal of all hunters is to go out and just shoot the biggest thing they could find just to take those antlers home and show off to their buddies. But really, the reality is there is a conservation aspect to what real trophy hunting is, which is we're pursuing the most mature animal on the mountain. And the term trophy hunting, as it's portrayed by the anti-hunting community, these folks that say, well, Washington is famous for this. These anti-hunters in Washington, these trophy hunters are out there spring bear hunting all the time. They're just trophy hunters.
Or trophy bobcat hunting. That came up in Arizona one time.
Yeah, and it's going on in Colorado right now with the mountain lion hunt ban. And, people don't even realize that mountain lion hunt meat is pretty dang good.
Oh, it's excellent.
It's excellent meat. It's some of the best. So is bear meat. Black bear meat is... Well, black bears are some of my favorite things to hunt. But
and they're not articulating that it is illegal to leave the meat for most things. I don't have the information.
I think it's every state, because I looked into that one.
Everything except wolves.
Maybe wolves, coyotes, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But trophy hunting gets this aura around it that as if you kill a 200-inch mule deer buck and don't take the meat home. Number one, it's not illegal. It's not legal, and number two, it's damn good meat.
Well, and
you're filling your freezer.
And,
so
and you say
that
not
gets
legal.
lost.
I want people to understand. It is in Wyoming. I'm going to speak Wyoming. You guys will know better in the other states. In Wyoming, it is a larger crime, larger fine, etc. if you get caught wanton waste, which is what you're talking about, cutting the head off, leaving the meat. Then if you go in out of season and kill a mature deer and put him, take the meat and put him without a tag. It is a bigger crime to leave that deer in the field unused.
Not only that, but it's perceived by fellow hunters
Oh.
as a bigger crime.
Yeah.
Like that, you are like, let's say deer season ends on November 30, but some big buck walks out on December 1 and somebody shoots him, versus the guy that 2 weeks ago shot a buck and left it wanting waste full buck. He's going to be viewed by the hunting community as worse than the individual that harvested everything out of that deer on December 1st. Yeah. Not that I'm promoting doing that. I just, as an example, but that theory, the trophy hunt, it comes out of this Bambi generation that saw this movie as kids, where they're out there just shooting deer and leaving them kind of thing, and they're portraying all hunters as that's what hunting season is.
My son has a PhD in wildlife, and he's never seen Bambi, to my knowledge. We wouldn't let him see it.
Good for you.
Well, the other thing, I've had to correct a few people, or at least educate them on Africa trophy hunting.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And some people just don't know it's illegal to bring the meat back. I'm serious. But that's the kind of stuff that doesn't cross your mind. Absolutely, it gets used.
Nothing gets wasted.
And in fact, it supplements a protein source for some communities that would otherwise be poaching.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone sent me
they're going to eat something.
Yep.
Poaching, aka killing animals without
because they're starving.
Illegally.
Exactly, because they're starving.
Yeah.
So the hunting dollars that go into some of these remote communities, and I've heard the arguments, well, you could have photo safaris and that not everywhere.
No.
Not everywhere. So you need it all, right? And so it stunned me to realize that some people just don't understand you can't bring the meat back legally. Yeah. That's U.S. law. Yeah. So that's why they bring the heads and the hides back.
Yeah. Yeah.
As a memory of what they did.
A customs border agent go through the roof, try and bring meat through L.A.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Even if it's axis deer, they throw a fit. And that came from Hawaii.
Yeah. Huh. And if I can throw one more thing in on the trophy thing, this is my perspective, but everybody thinks about this a little bit differently. And I try to educate my students or people that, when I'm discussing some of their essays or something like that, trophy is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
When my wife took her first Wyoming doe antelope, first thing she ever shot, I can tell you that brought me more joy, and it felt more like a trophy moment to me personally than the day I shot a 180-inch mule deer, or however big he was. I never got him scored, but it was a big damn deer. And, and I hunted, and to that end, I hunted for that big deer right up to the end, but I'd have killed a fork and horn just as fast because I was a poor broke grad student. So it's all in the eye of the beholder on what constitutes trophy. So it's been blown a little out of proportion and misused, but it depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Is it safe to say, because I've been saying this, probably lying, is it safe to say that in order to manage the herd health, you have to shoot the mature males? In order to manage mature or herd size, you have to take females?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that there's a heavy justification for having to remove larger males. I mean,
there isn't one.
I don't think so. No, I don't think there's scientific support for saying you have to remove the large males or something unhealthy or bad will happen to the population. I mean, the natural populations had a lot of mature males in there, and just kind of the way it is.
Yeah, it's more complicated.
Yeah,
that's in a nutshell.
It depends. Is that what you're saying as a biologist?
Yeah. And that's what everybody hates about biologists. We always say it depends, but it
does. It does, and that's what I like about talking to guys like you, because I'm sure I know you're on social media.
Yeah, you're
on social media, aren't you? Okay, I don't know, so I'm asking, but I'm curious. When you guys have been doing this a long time, what is is there a pattern that you see that hunters, specifically the hunting community, fight about when it comes to actual wildlife biology, and you see this constant theme of just wrongness, right? Like I've always that timber wolf example I gave you earlier. Oh, they had the timber wolves here before. They're not this kind of wolf. Is there something larger scale that drives you guys crazy as a pet peeve that you see people post or say or opine on social media?
I know you got an example of that, because it just seems like there's a lot of that out there.
Well,
a lot of different topics.
I try not to engage on social media.
You got to only shoot. You've got to only shoot 3 points or better, or you've only got to shoot. Such.
And one thing is, I don't post social media for me is the place where I go to get away from the controversies of my job. Just look at fun
that's
stuff.
And post an
Wrong place to go.
experience.
Look at
Yeah,
a squirrel with
yeah,
a cigarette or something.
Yeah, right.
So
Picture Ed and Jim at a meeting somewhere.
I'm not going to work 11 hours a day and then sit on my phone and continue controversial wildlife stuff.
Yeah.
I do that to have fun. So because of that, my engagement on social media isn't that kind of thing.
Hold on, there's an announcement.
Editor, pick this up.
We haven't printed cards against how we haven't think raise the level.
Well, at least we know where we're getting lunch.
Yeah.
Right?
RFA Green, the Tiger Visa. RFA Green, if you come a real wild 50 days, you have the lines there.
But hopefully Luke can sit down and cut that out, right?
Slice that.
Slice
Yeah.
that out. Obviously, recording at
cut
the
that out,
expo,
Luke.
we're going to have some background noise, right?
Yep.
So is there you weren't done.
Yeah, I would just say, my engagement in social media is not so much controversial wildlife stuff, because that's what I do for a living. Other people that go and they're a plumber all day, they might want to come home and engage in controversial wildlife stuff.
Yeah.
I don't, because
I don't
live
either.
that.
Well,
I
that's
live
a
that
great
lifestyle.
point. I
In
think
that-
that's
in
what
that.
happens. Yeah.
I think Jim and I are on the same page on that one. We may post hunting pictures, and your father's still alive. You hunt with your
Yep.
father and sons. That's a special moment. I'll post some stuff on my hunts and even my kills. But I don't get into it. It's dangerous turf.
Yeah.
It's just dangerous because it's never ending, right? If I want to argue with somebody who just is blatantly wrong, I'm never going to end because I'm speaking into hyperspace,
Well,
and
people have so much more courage when they're sitting.
they do.
My dad calls them basement dwellers. They have so much more courage
Yeah.
when they're hid behind the
Keyboard
Barkley has
commandos.
I like
Charles
that.
Barkley
I
has
heard
a-
of oh my gosh, this
too.
guy from we were on this event and he said it perfect. He goes, "Those are just monkeys throwing poop." That's all they are.
That's what they are, exactly.
Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
is. I mean, that's we've
Yeah.
talked about that on my show all the time. It's like, the problem is there's not the consequence of getting punched in the mouth. So people feel like they could say and behave how they want where they wouldn't in a public setting. Like somebody at the expo, all these people here, I guarantee you almost everybody here is guilty, including me, of being negative to somebody else on social media.
Yeah.
But they're not going to do that here.
Yeah.
All
No.
these people
They're not
here
gonna do
that
it
you
to
see
their
walking
face.
around,
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll bet
And
you somebody out
the-
there has talked smack about one of my podcast episodes,
Oh,
but
yeah.
they won't say
Right
it to
here.
me
Not
here.
to your face.
And I
Yeah.
I wish they would. I'd like,
We
that's
could
how
talk
we
about
get
it
better.
Yeah, Ed mentioned my dad. We talked about trophy hunts. This past year, we were on a mule deer hunt south of Tucson. And my dad glassing off one side of the hill. I was about 30 yards away, glassing off the other side of the hill. And he called me over. He turned 90 in June. He called me over and he says, "There's 3 deer over on that hill over there, and I know one of them's a buck." And I find them in my binoculars. He found them. I find them in my binoculars. There's 2 young bucks and a doe, and they're 300 yards away. So I get him set up on the bipod, get his elbow blocked up. He gets the buck in the scope, and I'm talking him through, telling him, the doe is on the right and that sort of thing. Make sure he's on the right deer. And he shoots once, and the deer jumps up. The rocks explode behind it, and the deer stands there, and he missed it. Obviously missed it. And then I remembered I forgot to tell him at 300 yards, you got to aim 6 inches high.
Oh,
I forgot to tell him that. So I told him that. So he lines it up, aims 6 inches high, pulls the trigger again. The deer goes right down. And when I went over there, the deer not only was drilled right through the rib cage, but it had a crease on its brisket 6 inches below.
exactly 6 inches.
So 2 shots, and he was right on.
Wow.
And he nailed that buck
90
at
years
90.
old.
90 years old.
That's
And he
fantastic.
shot a javelina last year at 89, and we're going javelina hunting in a week. Next week,
Gosh,
we're going
I hope
javelina
I'm-
hunting.
Oh,
again.
good
So-
for
I've
him.
I've enjoyed that because I get to Jim and I are Facebook friends, and I enjoy watching those kind of
Yep.
stories.
Yeah.
I will say that, and not everybody's going to agree with what I'm about to say, and I have no problem with people doing the grip and grins and posting, but there are some things that are a little rough for us to defend in the hunting
would
community.
100%
and it's
agree.
not helping.
Yeah.
It's not helpful.
And how do we identify where the line is?
It's a great question.
Because
Yeah.
that's
It's-
one of the things I've talked about too. They're like some people, like, why post it if it looks like a bloodbath?
I know.
Like, come on,
know
guys.
it.
We
Yeah.
can, but who am I to say?
Exactly.
I'm not the police, the Instagram police or whatever. But I think there needs to be like the fishing community does a really good job at kind of self-policing what's good publicity versus what's bad, and hunters, we don't. All we do is get mad at each other.
Right.
People that I know, I'll call them out with a real bloody picture. Not in public, but I'll send them a message and say, you got to post better pictures than that, like my nephew did. So if there are people I know, I call them out. I'm not going to sit on social media and call everybody out.
Yeah.
But
I agree. If we can do self-control and self-policing, and don't be mean to the guy.
Right.
Maybe he didn't realize it was bloody. Maybe he didn't understand.
He
Educate
didn't
him.
get
Go,
the
"Hey,
context. Exactly.
My kids don't want to see that."
Right.
Yep.
No.
And that happened in the case of my nephew. He said, "Really? Why?" And we started talking about it, and he said, "Oh yeah, I can kind of see what you mean." So if you're nice about it,
A little
you
hard
can
to do on a dull sheep, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Well, it's
mountain
like,
goats.
like I said, the fishing community, there's, I'm not even going to give any specifics, but there's a river that has a very specific fish that comes out of a very specific lake that I fish. And I just wanted to catch one of these fish, and I did. And I posted a picture of this fish.
Yeah.
And I had like 10 people private message, whatever they call that. And they were all very nice about it. They said, "Hey, we don't post pictures of that fish because we want to keep this a secret. Could you mind taking that off?" I took it down.
Wow.
If that would have been a hunter,
Interesting.
they would have called me every name under the book. I would have had to go to church
maybe.
to get over
Right.
it. And so it's like, that's what we kind of need to develop, I think, in the hunting community. Hunters are emotional people. I'm an emotional guy. I get pretty worked up over stuff, and I'd love to identify how we do that, like the fishermen do, and
with tact.
with
You
tact,
do everything with
and have the person
That's
that
a
we're
great way to
talking
put
to
it. Tact.
not come back in some overly defensive way because that's how their grandpa did it. Well, grandpa did it before there was, Facebook
Social
and
media.
Instagram.
Well,
right?
yeah.
And so
it gets back to that big picture we were talking about earlier. The big picture is hunting is in jeopardy
it is
right now.
absolutely.
And we need to be doing everything we possibly can to preserve hunting. You're not going to find a diehard hunter. Diehard? A harder, more diehard hunter, yeah.
At least I'm not the only
than
one that
me.
gets
I mean, I
tongue
just
twisted.
finished my 51st year hunting. Assuming I don't go goose hunting here in the next couple of weeks. But my point is, we've got to be cognizant that the world is watching, and we're not helping ourselves.
Yes.
There are simple things
Yes.
we can do to maintain that heritage, celebrate it without offending the world. And this pry it from my cold dead fingers, I'm never coming out, I'm never giving anything up, is not going to work forever.
No.
Well, and this is me, this is hunting, screw who gets offended by it. What
Right.
the thing that we have
It's
to
not
understand
helpful.
is it's not other hunters we're worried about. It's Aunt Betty.
It's the 60,
That's exactly
it's that
right.
60% I was talking about in the middle of that
Yep.
graph.
Yep.
Exactly.
It's the soccer
yeah.
mom.
It's the
And,
soccer mom.
and a lot of them, what is it, 70%, Jim, I think, of people still, when you ask the right question,
77 to
Still-
81%
still
of the
support
people
hunting.
support legal ethical
it's when you
hunting.
start carving it down into using words like trophy or predator, that kind of,
Yep.
that's where it starts getting a little
eroding it.
grayer and dicier.
It's like my mom was visiting us up in Montana over Christmas, and we went out to a restaurant, and on the way home, there was a whitetail buck that had been hit, and his rear end was just shattered, but it wasn't dead. And I don't know who hit it and where they went, but they left it there. Another car pulls up behind me. They had a gun handy, and my mom, who has been around this hunting thing her whole life, has never seen this take place. But a bullet was put in the back of that deer's head.
That's pretty violent and up close.
And
too,
and
though.
and and
Yeah.
when I got back, to me, I've seen, I've been around this my whole life. But when I got back in the truck, and her reaction, and my wife even, who's around this stuff, they don't see that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They don't see the violence that hunting is, and
The
sometimes
act.
the
They see-
act
they-
of it.
yeah.
And so it's not like, I guess one way to put it, like, I feel like my mom was like, what's that word? Almost PTSD over seeing this deer get put out of its misery, even though she knew that was the right thing. We don't, people that don't hunt, they don't want to see that. They don't want to see the blood and the carnage that, let's face it, hunting can be very violent, very graphic, very
primal,
full
very
of,
violent.
very primal. And some people just don't have the stomach for it. And that, I think, if we have this mentality that, screw it, this is who we are and this is what we're going to do,
no.
we're going to have a lot of bad negative press that is going to put the future of hunting in jeopardy more so.
And it makes Jim and I's job harder. Him as
Yeah.
a state agency biologist, me as working in the NGO community over a wide range of wildlifers. I mean, they're not all sportsmen, but they should understand the basics and foundation of wildlife management, and I would hope appreciate sustainable use. But not all of them do. It's just a different world, and
First
and
couple
we have
times
to
you
cater
watch
to
an
that.
animal die, it's
Adapt to
emotional.
that. Yeah,
It's emotional.
Yep.
I mean,
They're gonna
it's
remember it.
still emotional for me.
Vividly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's
Yep.
emotional.
I have a physical reaction when I do it, and I've noticed it's gotten worse the older I get too. When I was in my 20s,
Me
I
too.
didn't care.
Me too.
But I
Yeah.
can relate
I think
to
that's
that.
pretty common.
It is.
Yeah.
My dad
I think
talks
I was
about
not
that.
as sensitive enough to that with my 4 boys as I should have been. And my niece, I started her hunting.
Yeah.
And I think I was just like, I didn't even grow up hunting until 8th grade, but I don't know. I was just immune to it. And I think I didn't pay that much attention to how it looked to them.
Yeah.
And I think if you've got kids, I think you should pay attention to that and be aware that it's going to be emotional. It's going to be kind of shocking.
Absolutely.
It's funny.
Yeah.
My grandpa taught me this ethics wise. It just kind of gets into the ethics and who your mentor was. But I shot a rabbit one time after I started hunting, and I didn't kill it. And I just kind of stood there, and he goes, "Get the hell over there and dispatch that animal right now." So he taught me the ethics of quick, clean, and everybody makes a mistake. Everybody misses.
Yep.
But you might cripple one, and as fast as you can possibly dispatch that animal
It's all
cleanly.
about
And he
animal
taught me
welfare.
that.
We care about animal welfare, and we don't want them to suffer.
Exactly.
And I think, your grandpa teaching you that, I think we have to keep in mind too, there's a lot of folks that just got into hunting as adults. They didn't have the influence of dad or grandpa to help them understand, and also help them understand what some of these negative scenes that we can create, for lack of, I'm kind of drawing a blank on the verbiage there. But, my grandpa, he was not big on, back in the day, putting a buck up on the top of a station wagon, or, hanging the head over the side. I thought as a kid, I thought that's what we needed to do and go drive Main Street. Right. Yeah. But grandpa knew that that could, put the wrong taste in somebody's mouth.
Yeah.
And so anyways,
Yep.
Well, what do you think, Ike?
I think that is a wonderful conversation. I appreciate you guys taking the time
Absolutely.
down here in Salt Lake, and appreciate you taking the time and being honest and candid and informing. Not just the audience. I learned a lot.
Me too. I always do.
Yeah.
With you guys.
It was a good conversation. We talked about social media, and I'm on Instagram at Cervidnut, CERVIDNUT. A cervid is a member of the deer family.
Your old Instagram got suddenly taken down, remember?
It was, I used to
then
have a different Instagram, and it got shut down. And I think what we've finally determined is that I was using a John Deere logo. It was Jim Deere, and I was using a John Deere logo, and I photoshopped it to be a mule deer instead of a whitetail. And someone who knows someone who works in Meta looked into it, and they said they can't tell why it was just truncated. I mean, they just shut it down.
Yeah,
they said we can't tell why it was, but it came out of the branch that deals with trademarks.
Oh,
So I think that's what it was.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Because
I thought it was all the naked photos of you.
Yeah, right. Yep. That's why I don't do that
a little
anymore.
promiscuous, huh?
Now I know why Ed follows you.
Yeah, right.
So at Cervidnut, that'll be in my show notes. I assume you put all that stuff in yours too, Ike.
Absolutely. Yep. All the show notes. We'll links. We've talked about a couple videos and some links to you guys' 45 one sheets. And
the
put
fact
links
sheets.
to that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Look that up, because I think it's really important to have that information when, talking to Aunt Betty or your crazy ass sister-in-law.
We've got a lot of good stuff on the Wildlife Society
Yes.
website. It's open to the public. If you join, you get a membership. You get behind the firewall and get access to our journals and such. But we've got a lot of good information on just the profession and lots of things happening wildlife. It's not all deer and elk. There's creepy crawlies, birds, bats, rats, the works.
Bats and frogs.
But it's wildlife. Yep.
Ed, do you have an Instagram as well?
I don't. I'm not as active on social media as Jim is. I'm on Facebook.
But we won't hold it against you. I just want to make sure. Usually I feel half naked here. Usually when I'm recording, I have a little notebook. I'm taking notes, and so I'm going to have to remember what I'm putting in the.
You didn't know you were hosting until the microphone went
I
on.
didn't. Ike likes to put me on
called
the spot.
in cold there.
I did on purpose because I knew it was going to be a really good conversation.
It is good. I could keep this going for a long time. Actually, I could pick your guys' brain endlessly. And
I appreciate what you guys do yourselves because. Jim and I are but two voices, but This is a cascading effect and a movement
Yes,
we really need to
absolutely.
get rolling because everybody's got a target audience.
Yeah.
You have one, we have our different audiences, and we need to spread the word widely.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you guys coming on. And actually, Jim doesn't know, Huntsman doesn't know this, but I have a couple gifts for you for coming on.
What?
I know, right? So I got into silver recently. Yes, silver coins.
I was hoping
You've
it was
been seeing me play
one of the member elk hunts down in
Oh.
Colorado.
Yeah.
I don't even get those. I like it.
So I'll give you guys a couple silver coins. They're just cool.
Kidding?
Little things. Oh, I dropped.
I saw you playing with that, but I thought it was a bottle cap or something.
I don't know what that was.
It's a silver coin. It's
Oh, look at that.
1 troy ounce. The silver's got
Kidding.
big old elk
Sweet.
on it, and
Yeah.
yeah,
And it says
podcast.
podcast.
Yeah, and then ReadyWise, which is a hunting friendly dry food company. It's right over here. Booth's right behind us. They gave you both a little gift, and so if you get hungry at night, you can
That sounds awesome. Thanks.
Sweet.
eat some
Heck
stuff.
yeah.
So
Cool.
appreciate you guys coming on.
That is really
It's great.
awesome.
Yeah, thanks, guys. We really appreciate it.
Good
Yep,
to be
thank
here.
you.
Now,
Cool.
how do we stop the recording?
That's it.
Oh yeah,
That's it.
yeah. You know.
You made it. That's the end of the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please make sure you're following us on Instagram at The Western Huntsman and write us a good review at Apple Podcasts. Thanks, guys. See you next time. Stay Western, and I'll see you on the mountain.